Module 5, Due Diligence under Contract. We're on Module 5 of the 8 steps to your multifamily investing success. Due Diligence. An overview of Module 5, Due Diligence. The top 10 things to negotiate for repricing and getting the best deal possible. Have all financial due diligence in place to make sure your inspection period does not run out. Have the 14 financial items to ensure an accurate financial picture is painted of the property. Be sure to include all the important 11 physical checklist items to make sure the building is properly inspected before purchase. Have the 5 crucial operational due diligence items in place that most people overlook. Again, recapping Module 4. Did you do your action items? Did you look at 100 deals? Hopefully an offer was submitted, accepted, and now you're under contract and you're ready to start your due diligence process. Due diligence, begin. It's your responsibility to get it done. GSD, get stuff done. It's up to you to get the information and stay on top of the due diligence process. Don't wait for your realtor or anyone else to make sure it gets done. You can request an extension, but in a hot market, you may not get it. You have to abide by the contract dates. We have a closing company that we work with who can help with the process and timelines. Top items to review to negotiate for repricing and getting the best deal possible. Due diligence overview. The 5 financial due diligence potential sellers document submissions. Financial due diligence items. Is your current rent roll certified, signed and dated? Does it include the tenant's name, the unit number, the unit type or unit mix, rent, contract information, security deposit, pet deposit, lease expiration dates, etc.? Do you have copies of all leases and recent rental applications? Do you have a current and previous 2 months rent delinquency report? Does that include a list of all current tenants showing amount owed to landlord? Do you have operating statements including income and expenses for the period of 2 years and for the current year to date, certified, signed, and dated? Do you have a trailing 12 or a T12 operating statement with monthly breakdown that's certified, signed, and dated? 6 through 10, financial due diligence. Previous 2 years' tax returns, current operating and capital budgets of the property, including a comparison of actual to budgeted results and an explanation of significant variances. Current aged receivables and payables reports. Most recent property tax bills and evidence of payment. Vacancy report showing current and previous 12 months of vacancy. Copies of all insurance claims paid in the last 10 years. The last 5 years' loss runs, property and general liability. A completed insurance questionnaire. Copies of all warranties. A completed and signed seller's property disclosure. A lead-based paint and asbestos disclosure. Physical due diligence items. Copies of all environmental reports, surveys, phase 1, etc., if available, and audits. A schedule of all capital improvements made to the property for the past 10 years. Inventory of all property owned by the seller and a complete list of all inventory to be transferred with the property. Who owns the appliances? Does the tenant own them or do you own them? Office equipment, pool equipment. Who owns the laundry room? Is the laundry room in a contract? Does the laundry contract survive the sale of the property? If there's a window air conditioner unit, does it belong to you or does it belong to the tenant that lives there? Copies of all architectural renderings and blueprints. Engineering studies, including reports on walls, roofs, foundations, supports, and floors. Any structural, mechanical, plumbing, seismographic, HVAC, or other property systems. Maintenance and or repairs. Reports showing compliance with ADA requirements. All property licenses and permits. Certificate of fire inspections and any and all inspections, reports, and city-sanctioned property inspections. On-site invasive inspections to include walk every unit, professional plumbing inspection, professional HVAC inspection, professional electrical inspection, amenity review, playgrounds, pool, landscaping, fire compliance, etc. Rehab scope to include all needed repairs, major mechanicals, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, etc. Plus a budget for every unit turn. Those inspection items are going to vary widely depending on the property that you buy. Obviously, a 4-unit complex might not have a laundry room. It might not have a fire suppression system. It might not have a pool. It might not have a playground. So these inspection reports are very thorough. And the more time that you can spend doing inspections and going over the property, the more it'll benefit you in the future. If you can talk to the seller, or if there's a maintenance person on site, you want to try to ask them as much about the property as you can. And you want to try to have them give you as much information about the property as you can. If there's a plumber already working on a property, you want to try to use that same plumber because they know where the problem areas are. They can also tell you what recent repairs they've made. On the operational side of things, ask for information on all subsidized tenants to include the HAP contract or the Section 8 contract, the caseworker contact information, the rental assistance documents, and the transfer process. When you're the new owner and Section 8 is paying rent to the old owner, there's a form you have to complete and typically a W-9 you have to submit, and that process could take a month or two. So always have a list of Section 8 tenants and make sure you get into the Section 8 office as soon as possible to let them know that you're the new owner, and they're usually going to require a copy of the deed that you can provide to them to prove that ownership. All service contracts, manufacturer and service warranties, and other written contracts or agreements. Contracted services can have or can be month to month, and they can be terminated upon notice, or sometimes they follow the property, and a lot like a tenant, these service contracts will survive the sale. So it's important that you know that and know the terms of those contracts. Contracted services could include laundry machines. We haven't talked a lot about laundry machines or laundry contracts. 2 of our properties have an agreement with a national laundry company, and our agreement with them is that we'll provide a secure and well-lit, safe, and maintained laundry room area. We'll provide the electricity, the natural gas, and the hot water to operate washers and dryers. They provide the washer, the dryer, the maintenance, and the collection. And our agreement with those companies is a 50-50 split. So we pay the bills for the utilities, we keep the laundry room open and lit and clean and functioning, and they bring the machines and they maintain the machines and they collect the money and we get half. So that's a negotiable contract that survives the sale of the property. We have them because they were in place when we bought the property. Other contract services could include pest control. If you have termites and the property's been treated for termites, a lot of pest control companies will give a termite warranty, and you have to pay a fee annually to keep that warranty in state. And if you do pay that annual fee, anytime you see evidence of termite, or at your request, the property can be inspected and they will treat and remove any termites that are discovered while under that contract. Waste disposal or trash hauling, landscaping, snow removal, housekeeping, cleaning services, window washing, security systems, parking lot sweeping, ground leases or land leases, telecommunication leases, service contracts. Again, cable contracts are sometimes found with the property, and basically you pay the cable company, for example, $10 a month. If you have 100 units, you're going to pay the cable company $1,000 a month, $10 per unit, 100 units. And what that does is that provides basic cable to the tenant. And then you have the option to connect the cable for the tenant for free, or you can mark up that cable and sell it to the tenant for a fee, or you have the ability to provide basic internet to the tenant. The problem with those contracts is you usually have to pay for that service, whether the tenant wants it or not, and whether the apartment is occupied or not. So in a situation where you might have 100 units and 10 or 20 people don't want the service, or you have some vacancy, you're unable to collect for that cable. Those contracts are typically long contracts and typically survive the sale as well. Any service contract should contain the following: the term of the contract, the monthly cost for the service, the work to be performed, and the termination policy. Copies for 3 months of all local utility invoices showing the current service, to include number of meters per utility, meter numbers, billing information, account numbers, a breakdown of owner paid, tenant paid, etc. Certificates of occupancy for each building, if applicable, in the municipality that the property is located in. On-site staff interviews. Anyone interested in staying on the site or surviving the sale. Be in constant contact with your lender. Keep checking in with them throughout the due diligence process. Be sure your lender is responsive. The lender and title will often start blaming each other for delays. The constant he said, she said can go back and forth and delay your sale. Always be proactive. Find out what you need from the lender and find out what you need from the escrow officer. and I'll typically put them on an email together, and I'll make sure to introduce each to the other, and then I will leave some open instructions with them to give permission for either one to ask for anything on my behalf and for the other to be able to provide it. I also ask to be CC'd on all communication. That way, I make sure that if someone misses an email, I can follow up with them. Request a map of the property. Again, this depends on the size of the property. If you have a 4-unit property, your map could be pretty easy. You want to know all the key maintenance locations. You want to know where the sewer cleanouts are. You want to know where the gas main turnouts are. If you have a fire sprinkler system, you want to know where the fire riser is. If you have a septic tank on the property, you want to know where the septic tank cleanout is. You want to know where your electrical main panel is, and you want to know what main goes to what sub. You want to know where timers are for lights, for irrigation, for parking lots. We often will convert timers to photocells. Mailbox directory. You want to know what mailbox is assigned to what unit number. Parking space directory. What parking space is assigned to what unit. Again, this is where having a conversation with the current owner, the seller, or maintenance can save you a lot of time in the future. Inspection items. If you get stuck, you can always reach out to a professional in the industry. So do you want to hire an inspector? For your initial deal, I would recommend hiring an inspector. Inspectors get paid to find problems. Get multiple quotes for an inspector. 1 to 4 units residential is one price. 5 and more is a commercial price. I've seen blogs on this, on Bigger Pockets. People are asking what people pay for inspectors in their area. I've seen prices ranging from $50 to $100 per unit. Like for a smaller property, like a fourplex, $400. I've also seen where they'll charge $50 to $100 per unit with a minimum of $1,500 and a maximum of $3,000. So just, again, get multiple quotes, find somebody that's good at their job, and again, they're going to find problems. Once they find a problem, we once had a deal where the inspection was done and the inspector came back to us and said, the roof's no good, the roof needs to be replaced, it's going to be $300,000. So we used that information, went back to the seller and said, hey, the roof's no good, it needs to be replaced, they're quoting us $300,000. So the seller gave us a discount in our sales price to accommodate that repair. So again, inspectors, do you want to hire a professional? Some other things that need to be inspected: fire extinguisher compliance. If you don't have fire sprinklers, you might need fire extinguishers. And there's some rules as to how many fire extinguishers you need per occupied square foot and what the maximum distance is supposed to be from a fire extinguisher to a unit. Backflow meters. Our city requires a backflow meter for any apartment that's connected to the city water supply. You have multifamily inspectors and you have commercial inspectors. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different people. Make sure you get your roof inspected. Make sure that your air conditioner has a heater in it. We bought a property once, sent out the air conditioner inspector, and he found out that 5 or 6 air conditioners had been replaced on the property, and they replaced them in the summer, and so they didn't bother to put a heater in them. So because we caught that in our inspection, we were able to tell the seller, hey, listen, these heaters need to be replaced or you need to credit us for them. And they in turn went back to their contractor and said, hey, you sold us this air conditioner, why doesn't it have a heater in it? And their contractor in turn came back and put the heaters in the units. Appraisal. A bank financed job will require an appraisal. A bank financed property will require an appraisal, and the appraisal will be ordered by the bank. A seller carry property, on the other hand, will not require an appraisal. I recommend that if you're interested in buying a property, that you reach out to an appraiser and hire them to do an appraisal for you, even on a seller carryback. Again, until you're comfortable analyzing these deals, it's best to use the professional and pay the money to make sure that the deal is there for you, or to make sure that the property that you're buying is worth the price you're paying. Renegotiate during due diligence. Here's a note that talks about the inspection we did and the roof that needed to replace. We asked for a credit and we got it. You're also going to do a rent audit where you're going to take the rent roll that was provided to you when you made the offer, and you're going to match that up to every single lease that comes with the property. So if you have 100 units and it says that all 100 units are rented out for $700 a month with the $700 deposit, you need to make sure that the physical leases are in place that match what the rent roll says. Because you did your analysis based on that income, if you find that 50 of the apartments don't have a lease at all, you can go back to the seller and say, look, I did my analysis based on 100 units being occupied at $700 a month and being in a lease. Now that you only have 50 units that are in a lease, you need to credit me X amount of dollars for that discrepancy. Again, this is an ask or a renegotiate. As long as you're in your due diligence period, if you ask and they say no, you could pull out of the deal if that's important to you. If a property has natural gas, it's recommended to spray soapy water on all fittings and connections to check for bubbles. There's also an odorant added to the gas that smells like rotten eggs. Your gas company will go out anytime you think there's a leak. So during your due diligence, if you smell gas, you absolutely, no matter what, should reach out to the gas company. This is also why it's important to hire a professional to inspect your property for you. Plumbing. The type of plumbing on a property could matter to you. Older properties used cast iron. Cast iron tends to rust. And when it rusts, a building could need to be repiped. So if you're buying a property that's at any point in its economic life where the plumbing is failing, that's a pretty big expense for you. So your inspector should be able to tell you if it's cast iron, if there's a problem. There's another type of pipe called Orangeburg that's used underground, and it's buried, and it's the main sewer drain. It's basically tar paper. So it's a very, very weak, very old style of piping. It works fine in certain areas, but once it runs out, you're looking at an expensive repair to dig up from the property to the sewer, to the main city sewer connection. You also need to get a septic inspection if the property's on a septic. Basically, a septic company comes out, they inspect the tank, they make sure it's doing its job, and then they give you a certified report. In our county, a septic inspection is required anytime a property transfers title. Your electrician can take a look at your electrical and look for deficiencies. Your HVAC and heating contractor can come out and take a look at HVAC and heating. This goes back to the time when I told you that we bought some units that only had AC. Environmental inspections aren't required on all properties. I ran into a deal once where a property that I purchased was next door to a gas station. So when your property's next door to a gas station, a motor vehicle repair facility, a wrecking yard, a landfill, those are some of the items that I know, that flags the lending company to ask for further environmental inspection. So the banks do it because they want to protect themselves. So if you buy a property next door to a gas station and the gas station has an underground leak and that leaks into your property, that could become your responsibility if the gas station fails to complete the environmental cleanup or goes bankrupt. There's a state, our state has a Superfund site. A Superfund site is basically an environmental cleanup. But when you're buying the property with the bank and you have to get a phase one inspection, that inspection can take some time depending on your area and depending on the inspectors in your area. I got into a situation where we had a property under contract, we had a certain amount of time, and the environmental inspection came back that it needed to go to phase one. So we had to ask the seller for an extension to our contract through no fault of our own to get that phase one inspection. So the seller agreed to that phase one inspection, or they agreed to extending our time so that we could get that inspection. They gave us 30 days. It was a busy time. The bank has to order it because it's the bank's requirement. So the bank got to pick the company that did the inspection. So when the bank reached back out to the inspector and said, go ahead and do it, and asked him how long it was going to take, they gave him a time, and then they didn't meet that time. So we had to ask for another inspection. And when we asked for the second inspection, the seller said, well, we'll do it, but we're getting way past the time that we originally agreed to. And if you don't get this taken care of, then we're going to void the contract, not give you any extensions, and we're going to move on to another buyer. Well, we explained to them that the bank required it and any bank would require it, and just bear with us. So we got them to give us another 30 days. So right about that time, the first inspection was completed. It was a couple days into the second 30-day extension, and the environmental company said the phase one inspection was inconclusive. We need another X amount of dollars from you and more time. So we at that point reached out to the bank, reached out to the seller, and reached out to the environmental company all together, and had great conversation with them and got everything cleared up, and were able to move forward. Look at a year of utility bills to get a good baseline. Here again is our septic certification slide. When you're doing your unit-to-unit walkthrough inspection, and you should walk through every unit unless you hire a property manager to do it for you, take that opportunity to talk to the tenants and ask them if there's any problems with the unit. Does the roof leak every time it rains? Does the air conditioner break down every 3 days? Are there any problems that current management is not taking care of? Foundation inspection. When you walk the property, do you need a foundation inspection? Some of the things that we look at when we're walking a property is, does every door open and close? When foundations start to fail, buildings start to sag, and doors don't open or close. You'll also see cracks in the ceiling, inside or outside, cracks in the stucco, separation of sidewalks, stairs, etc. Any foundation problem requires a special type of engineer to come out, and he's the structural engineer, and he charges you to do an inspection, and once he does the inspection, then he can communicate with a contractor, and that contractor can put out a scope of repair, and then, he contacts the architect puts out the scope for repair, and then, or the engineer, and then you can get bids from a contractor. It's very expensive, typically, depending on your region, and something that you want to catch and you definitely want to not be caught off guard by. Swimming pool inspection. If your swimming pool is cracked, sometimes it's hard to tell, and sometimes you can get some evidence of the swimming pool being cracked by looking at your water bill. If it's cracked and it leaks, it's going to waste a lot of water. When you're buying a property, you want to inspect the property's CC&Rs. Those are the covenants, codes, and restrictions. Not all properties have this. I have some condominiums that were converted to rentals years ago, and they have special rules in those condominium associations. So also, some CC&Rs, or covenants, codes, and restrictions, don't allow rentals. Some of them don't allow short-term rentals. Some of them don't allow rentals at all. Some other things that come up in CC&Rs is, do they allow guests to park inside the community? That's a yes or no, but it's in the CC&Rs. If you rent to someone and you don't provide parking for them, or you say no guests are allowed to park inside the property, that could be an issue. So you just want to be familiar with those CC&Rs. Another situation that could occur, your CC&Rs, your community don't allow handymen to come in and do work on a property, or they require certain levels of licensure, certain levels of liability insurance, workman's comp, etc. So just make sure you're familiar with those CC&Rs or those condo association guidelines. HOA. What is an HOA? An HOA is a homeowners association. What are the costs and what's included? So if you buy a rental that's in a homeowners association, that homeowners association sometimes covers the water to the property. It sometimes covers landscape and maintenance. It could cover the exterior of the building. It could cover any fees to maintain the pool. It also has its own set of rules, fees, and fines. For example, if your tenant allows a dog to defecate outside and doesn't clean up after it, your homeowners association could charge you $50 or $100. You're the one that's responsible to pay that. So make sure you know what the fees are and the fines are, and make sure that you include in your lease any charges, fees, or fines that might be assessed to you to make sure they're collectible from your tenant. When you're evaluating a property that's in an HOA, another thing to ask is, are there any units in this HOA that are behind on their dues? If you're buying in a community that's heavy in foreclosure, sometimes those dues are in extreme arrears. And an example of that would be if there was a 100-unit HOA and 50 units were in foreclosure, there's a possibility that your $100 a month could be raised to $200 a month because you have to cover the association fees for the units that are in foreclosure. I once bought several condominiums in a homeowners association, and when I went to the first meeting, I looked at the operating expenses and I saw opportunity. Opportunity in insurance, opportunity in lowering that cost, opportunity in lowering the trash was also included, opportunity in lowering the water, the landscape, the maintenance. So I became the president of that unit, of that homeowners association, and I was able to cut costs considerably. Lease audits. When you do your lease audit, make sure that you take note of the deposit that the tenant paid, and make sure that those deposits that the tenant paid are transferred to you at closing. Make sure those lease amounts in those contracts match the rent roll. Make sure that the term of the lease matches the rent roll. Look out for concessions. I once bought a property, and the first month I owned that property, a tenant didn't pay the rent. And I said, hey, why didn't you pay your rent this month? And they said, oh, when I signed my lease, the leasing company told me that I could have my third and fifth month here free. And I said, that's ridiculous. You can't have your third and your fifth month for free. But first I have to check the lease before I say that. So I go pull the lease, and sure enough, the lease says third and fifth month are free. So some property managers will use things called concessions, and they'll use those concessions to fill up a property, and you could get caught by that. And in my situation, the concessions weren't bad, but there can be any concession written into a lease that any property manager deems feasible. So make sure that you read through those leases, every page looking for concessions. Make sure that pets are accounted for and pet rent and deposit are listed in the lease. If you look at a manager's unit, make sure that the manager intends to stay and pay or intends to move out by the move-out date or the close of escrow date. Appliances. What appliances are included or provided by the landlord? That should be on the lease. My leases all say stove and refrigerator are provided by the landlord. My units with washers and dryers say washer and dryer provided by landlord. When a tenant moves out and you've just bought the property and they take the washer and dryer with them and you thought the washer and dryer stayed with the apartment, the lease is the only document that you have on your side when you go to court. This side restates the last statement. What utilities and appliances are included in the lease and in the property? What transfer and convey with purchase? The refrigerator, washer, and dryer are the main things that we see. Concessions to tenants are used by property managers to fill vacancy. In this instance, we see the third month free and the 6th month free. Or I've seen 6 months free on move-in. Make sure you look at this in your lease. You just lowered your overall gross potential income. Sometimes it's very hard to see in the lease, so make sure you look at every page. Request 3 months of bank activity. When you get 3 months bank activity, you add up all the deposits. You make sure that the deposits match the leases. If the leases say you have 100 units at $1,000 each, you should have $100,000 deposited for every month of those 3 months. If the number is only $60,000 and the leases show full, you need to figure out why. You can talk to the tenant, you can ask them if they have a copy of their receipt, but make sure you get this information on time. If you wait till the end of your due diligence period, you might only have 1 or 2 or 3 days to verify all this information. There's a phrase called salting the box. I've heard of cases where people will fill up apartments with free tenants just to sell a property. It's never happened to me, but I'm always on the lookout for it. I want to, again, verify that the people on the lease are the people that live in the apartment. I want to verify how much rent they pay, and I want to see the receipts, and I want to match the income to the bank statement. Very important. Get a current rent roll, get 3 years of profit and loss, and look at the bank statements. When it's time for your individual unit inspections, whether you're going to do them, whether you're going to walk through them with a professional, or whether you're going to hire a property inspector to do them for you, make sure that you give the proper notice to the tenant. In our state, it requires a 48-hour notice. It would be best to have all your inspectors with you at one time. If you're going to use a separate inspector for termites or bed bugs or pest, and another inspector for the roof, and another inspector for AC, and another inspector for electric, and another inspector for overall maintenance, it'd be best to have everybody coming through there all at once so the tenants are not constantly bothered. Make sure you look at the requirements for your state and make sure you post with plenty of notice. Also, make sure you give yourself enough time. If you only have to give a 48-hour notice and it's Monday and you say inspections are Thursday and they're going to be Thursday morning at 9 a.m. If you're inspecting 100 units, you might start at 9 a.m. and you might finish at 5 p.m. So make sure your notice says it's going to be inspected Thursday between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. And that's, in our state, that's the only notice you have to give. But I've been on inspections where we gave notice and we had a master pass key to get in, and both doors were locked and we couldn't get in the property. And at that point, you can make a choice. You can either choose to come back to that unit again another time and another time, or you can talk to the manager and make forced entry. It just really depends on you and the area and the confidence you have in the property. But again, you don't want to not inspect a unit and then have a big surprise. Actions. There's a lot of actions to this module. It seems to be all action. Your due diligence checklist, we went through that. Make sure you look for that in the business in the box. When you retrade or you do a counteroffer, again, that's based on deficiencies found during your inspection. Lease audit. Make sure you get the rent roll on day one. Well, you should have a rent roll before you make an offer, or for sure at least on the day within the 5 days your offer is inspected. Immediately request leases so you can match the rent roll with the leases when you do your lease audit. When you buy the property, the leases become your property. So the leases come with you. The seller may want to hold on to a copy for some reason, but you definitely need to be provided with a copy at close of escrow. Discovery. What happens if there's a problem found that cannot be financially remedied? Is there ever a time to walk away? This could be based on down payment. This could be based on defect or repairs needed. You're going to want to continuously analyze the deal. Do you still want the deal if it needs $300,000 of roof repair and the seller refuses to accommodate you? Don't do the HP method. The more organized you are and the more you watch your deadlines, the better you're off. The more organized you are and the more you watch your deadlines, the better off you're going to be. Do not count on the hope and pray method. Be prepared. Make sure you have your management plan ready at time of closing. Make sure that you follow your due diligence checklist. Make sure that you retrade or counter based on the findings of those defects. Do your lease audit and spend a lot of time in recovery. Thanks for sticking with us. We know there was a lot of information shared there, and trust me, it's your best interest to get all these due diligence items done. Once you close, you own that deal. So our action plan is make sure you go over your due diligence checklist. Make sure you look for opportunities and take advantage of opportunities to make a counter to your original offer or to retrade price due to maybe some inefficiencies or some defect that was discovered during this time. Make sure you did your lease audit. Your lease audit must match the income and the rent roll. Also, discovery. Thank you for your time in completing the due diligence module with us. We have gone over commit to change, getting ready to buy, finding a deal, analyzing the deal and making the offer, and now due diligence. What's coming next, you ask? The close, module 6. We look forward to building freedom and cash flow together. We'll see you in the next module.